Welcome back to Revenge Room. If you're new here, this is the channel where betrayal meets justice and where patience becomes the most powerful weapon. Today's story is called My Son Had Transferred My Metal Workshop to His Wife's Family to Manage, so I walked away. They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own son, the child you raised, the heir, you built an empire, signs your life's work away to his wife's family without telling you a single word? 40 years. 40 years of sweat sacrifice and calloused hands building a metal fabrication shop from nothing. My wife and I started with borrowed tools and a dream. She passed away 2 years ago, and I thought my son would carry our legacy forward. Instead, I found documents hidden in the office printer, transfer agreements, a new company, his wife listed as CEO, my name nowhere. My own son had signed me out of my own life. Most men would have exploded. Most men would have screamed, threatened, fought. But I remembered something my late wife once told me: never fight when they think you're weak. Fight when they think they've already won. So I walked away. No arguments, no tears, just silence. 1 week later, my phone rang. My son's voice was shaking. Our biggest client, the one worth 40% of our revenue, was about to leave, and my son begged me to help. I said 4 words that changed everything. Let the heir handle it. What happened next will shock you. There are twists in this story you will never see coming, secrets my wife left behind from beyond the grave, and a betrayal deeper than you can imagine. Stay until the very end, because the final satisfaction, the final moment of justice, will leave you breathless. This is my story. My name is Samuel Crowley. I am 70 years old, a widower, and for the past 4 decades I have been the founder and owner of a metal fabrication shop in a small town where everyone knows your name and your word still means something. My wife Ruth passed away 2 years ago, and I thought I understood grief. I was wrong. Grief is not just losing someone you love. Grief is watching everything you built together be taken apart by the people who were supposed to protect it. But before I tell you about the betrayal, I need to tell you about the beginning. Because you cannot understand what was stolen from me unless you understand what we created. 40 years ago, Ruth and I started with nothing. I mean, truly nothing. We had borrowed tools from her uncle, a rented garage that leaked every time it rained, and exactly $237 in savings. I remember that number because Ruth wrote it on a piece of paper and taped it to the wall. She said it was our seed, and seeds grow into forests if you water them with enough sweat. That woman had a way with words that I never had. She could make you believe in impossible things just by the way she smiled when she said them. I worked the machines while Ruth handled the customers. That was our partnership, and it was perfect in ways I did not appreciate until she was gone. I could shape metal into anything: railings, gates, custom fixtures, structural components. My hands understood the language of steel and iron, but Ruth understood the language of people. She remembered every customer's name, their children's names, their birthdays. She sent handwritten thank you notes after every order. She knew when someone was struggling financially and quietly extended payment terms without making them feel ashamed. The shop became successful not because we offered the lowest prices or the fastest delivery. We succeeded because people trusted us. And that trust was Ruth's gift to build. Her closest friend was a man named Howard Miller. They had known each other since elementary school, long before I came into the picture. Howard grew up to become a contractor, and eventually he became our biggest client. But his friendship with Ruth was never about business. They were like siblings, the kind of bond that forms when you share childhood secrets and teenage heartbreaks. When Howard brought his company's fabrication work to our shop, Ruth insisted we treat him like any other customer. No special favors, no preferential treatment. She said real friendship survives honesty, not shortcuts. Howard respected that. He stayed with us for 30 years, and not once did our personal relationship compromise our professional standards. Our son Ethan was born 3 years after we opened the shop. He grew up surrounded by the smell of welding sparks and the sound of grinding metal. I wanted him to love it the way I did. I tried to teach him the trade, showed him how to read blueprints, how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel when the metal was ready to bend. But Ethan's hands never found the rhythm. He preferred books to machines' numbers to sparks. He would sit in the corner of the shop doing homework while I worked, and sometimes I caught myself feeling disappointed. I never said it out loud, but I think he knew. Ruth would scold me gently when I pushed too hard. She would say, "He's different from you, Samuel. That's not a flaw." I nodded when she said it, but I never fully understood what she meant. I loved my son. I truly did, but I didn't know how to show it in words. I showed it in work and providing and building a future I thought he would inherit. I thought that was enough. I thought he understood. Ruth had a habit of writing letters for important occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, moments of crisis and celebration. Her handwriting was beautiful, the kind they do not teach anymore. Before she passed, when the doctors told us her heart was failing, she gave me a small wooden box. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes numbered 1, 2, and 3. She made me promise not to open them unless I truly needed to. "You'll know when," she said, squeezing my hand with what little strength she had left. "Trust me, Samuel, you'll know." I kept that box on my desk for 2 years. I never opened it. I thought I never would. I thought the worst was already behind me. I thought building a future for my son meant he would never take it from me. The day Ruth died, something inside me died with her. I didn't realize it at first. Grief does not announce itself like a thunderstorm. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling across a field at dawn, until suddenly you cannot see 3 feet in front of you, and you've forgotten what sunlight looks like. For 40 years, Ruth had been my compass. Without her, I was lost in ways I could not even name. I stopped going to the shop every day. At first, I told myself I needed time, a week, maybe 2. But the weeks stretched into months, and the months blurred together until I could no longer remember why I used to wake up at 5 in the morning. The machines that once felt like extensions of my own hands now seemed foreign, cold, purposeless. I would walk through the doors and hear nothing but silence where Ruth's voice used to be. She had greeted every employee by name. She had hummed while organizing invoices. She had filled that space with warmth I never appreciated until it was gone. Now, the shop felt like a museum of memories I could not bear to revisit. I spent most of my days at home sitting by the window where Ruth had planted her white lilies. She loved those flowers. She said they reminded her of her grandmother's garden in Virginia, a place she visited every summer as a child. I watered them exactly the way she taught me, measuring the soil moisture with my finger, adjusting the blinds so they got morning light but not the harsh afternoon sun. It was the only thing that still made sense. Everything else felt like noise. My daughter-in-law Lauren noticed my withdrawal before anyone else. She was always observant, always calculating. I used to think that was a strength. She came to the house one afternoon with Ethan carrying a folder of documents and wearing that polished smile she had perfected over the years. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and spoke in a voice that sounded almost tender. "Father," she said, "you've been carrying too much weight for too long. Ethan and I want to help. We think it's time for him to take over the daily management of the shop. Just temporarily, of course, until you feel ready to come back." I looked at Ethan. He nodded but didn't speak. That should have been my first warning. My son had never been comfortable with confrontation, but this was different. He looked rehearsed, like an actor who had memorized his lines but did not fully believe them. Lauren slid the documents across the table. "Power of attorney," she explained. "Limited scope. Just for routine matters. Signing checks, approving orders, handling employee paperwork. Nothing major, nothing permanent." She pointed to the lines where I needed to sign, and her fingernail was painted a deep red that reminded me of dried blood. I should have read every word. I should have called my lawyer. I should have asked questions. But grief makes people blind, and I was so tired of fighting, tired of thinking, tired of being the one who held everything together. I trusted my son. I trusted his wife. I signed the papers without reading them carefully, and Lauren smiled as she slid them back into her folder. "Thank you, Father," she said. "This will make everything so much easier." After that, things changed quickly. Ethan began making decisions without consulting me. New suppliers appeared on the books, companies I had never heard of, offering materials at prices that seemed too good to be true. The old suppliers, the ones Ruth and I had worked with for decades, started calling me confused. One of them, a man named George, who had sold us steel since the beginning, said Ethan had terminated their contract without explanation. I asked Ethan about it, and he shrugged. "Their prices were outdated, Dad. The industry has changed. We need to stay competitive." I noticed new employees, too, young people with business degrees and confident handshakes who called me Mr. Crowley in a way that felt more like dismissal than respect. They did not know the old ways. They did not understand that our shop was built on relationships, not spreadsheets. They looked at me like I was a relic, something to be tolerated until I had the decency to disappear. Lauren attended every meeting now. She sat at the head of the conference table, taking notes, asking pointed questions, suggesting improvements that always seemed to benefit her vision rather than mine. I watched her and felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I said nothing. I told myself this was progress. I told myself my son was finally stepping up, finally taking responsibility, finally becoming the leader I had always hoped he would be. I wanted so badly to believe it. One evening, the phone rang. It was Howard. His voice sounded different, heavier than usual, like he was carrying something he was not sure how to put down. "Samuel," he said, "how are you holding up?" We talked for a few minutes about nothing important, the weather, his grandchildren, a fishing trip he was planning. Then, just as I thought he was about to hang up, he asked a question that stopped me cold. "Have you opened Ruth's box yet?" I froze. The wooden box was sitting on my desk exactly where it had been for 2 years. I had not touched it. I had not even looked at it closely. "How did Howard know about the letters?" "She told me about it," Howard said, as if reading my thoughts. "Years ago, before she got sick. She made me promise to remind you if enough time passed." "Remind me of what?" There was a pause. I could hear Howard breathing on the other end of the line, choosing his words carefully. "She wanted to make sure you remembered. That's all. Just remember the box, Samuel. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." Before I could ask anything else, Howard said he had to go. The line went dead, and I was left standing in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at nothing. Something about his tone unsettled me. Ruth had told him about the letters. She had asked him to remind me. Why? What had she known? What had she prepared for? I walked to my desk and looked at the wooden box. The 3 envelopes inside felt like whispers from another world. I reached out to touch the lid, then pulled my hand back. Not yet, I told myself. I was not ready. I did not need them. I trusted my son. I trusted his wife. I trusted that everything would be fine. That trust would soon be used against me. The changes came slowly at first, so slowly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. A meeting moved to a different time, a document signed without my initials, a decision made while I was watering Ruth's lilies at home. Each incident seemed small on its own, barely worth mentioning, but small things have a way of accumulating like drops of water wearing down stone. By the time I noticed the erosion, the damage was already done. I tried to re-engage with the shop. I started coming in more regularly, arriving at the times I remembered from before Ruth's death, but the rhythms had shifted. One morning, I walked into the conference room for what I thought was our weekly operations meeting, only to find empty chairs and a cold coffee pot. The whiteboard had been erased, but I could still see the ghost of writing beneath the surface. Numbers, names, plans I had never been told about. I found Lauren in her office, which used to be a storage closet before she decided it needed to be converted. She looked up from her laptop with that polished smile I had come to recognize as a mask. "Father," she said, "I didn't expect you today. The meeting was moved to yesterday afternoon. Didn't Ethan tell you?" He had not. I was certain of it. But when I mentioned this to Lauren, she tilted her head sympathetically, the way you might look at a confused, elderly relative who has forgotten where he put his glasses. "We didn't want to bother you," she said. "You're still recovering. We thought it would be easier if we handled things ourselves for a while longer." Her tone was kind. Her words were reasonable, but her eyes were cold, and something in the way she said "we" made it clear that I was no longer part of that pronoun. I was an outsider in my own company, a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The old employees began to disappear. Not all at once, but steadily, like leaves falling from a tree in autumn. Margaret from accounting, who had worked with Ruth for 22 years, took early retirement. She hugged me on her last day and whispered, "It's not the same here anymore, Samuel." "I'm sorry." Tom from the fabrication floor, one of my original hires, transferred to a competitor across town. He did not even say goodbye. I heard through the grapevine that he had clashed with Lauren over safety protocols. Apparently her efficiency improvements included cutting corners that Tom refused to accept. New faces replaced the old ones. Young people with degrees from business schools and eyes that looked at spreadsheets instead of people. They called Lauren ma'am with genuine deference. They called me Mr. Crowley with barely concealed impatience, as if I were an obstacle they had to navigate around rather than a founder they should respect. None of them knew Ruth. None of them understood that this shop was built on handshakes and trust, not quarterly projections and cost-cutting algorithms. The shop still ran. Orders went out. Money came in. On paper, everything looked fine. But the soul was different. I could feel it the moment I walked through the doors. The warmth had been replaced by efficiency. The trust had been replaced by metrics. The family atmosphere Ruth and I had cultivated for 4 decades had been sterilized into something that resembled a factory more than a workshop. It was still my name on the building, but it no longer felt like my shop. I started looking more closely at the financial reports. Numbers had always been Ruth's domain, but I understood enough to know when something did not add up. I noticed expenses I had never approved, consulting fees to companies I had never heard of, equipment purchases that seemed excessive, travel costs for conferences I had not known about. When I cross-referenced the current reports with my memory of how we used to operate, the discrepancies became impossible to ignore. I brought my concerns to Ethan. I tried to keep my voice calm, tried to approach it as a father seeking to understand rather than an owner demanding answers. But my son's reaction caught me off guard. His face hardened the moment I mentioned the numbers. His shoulders tensed. He looked at me not with the patience of a son explaining something to his aging father, but with the irritation of a man who resents being questioned. "The industry has changed, Dad," he said. "You can't run a business the way you did 30 years ago. Things cost more now. We have to invest in growth. We have to modernize." The words stung more than I expected, not because they were harsh, but because they dismissed everything Ruth and I had built as outdated, irrelevant, something to be outgrown rather than honored. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind him that our outdated methods had kept this shop profitable for 4 decades, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind, who was no longer interested in his father's opinion. A few days later, Howard called again. We exchanged pleasantries, but I could tell he had something on his mind. Finally, he said something that lodged itself in my memory like a splinter. "Ruth always prepared for everything, didn't she?" I was not sure what he meant, so I asked him to explain. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that carries weight. "She was worried about the shop's future," Howard said carefully. "Not the business itself. She knew the business was solid. She was worried about the family, about what might happen after she was gone." My throat tightened. "What did she ask you to do?" "She made me promise to watch over things," Howard said, "to pay attention, to let her know if I ever saw something that concerned me." He paused again. "Obviously, I can't tell her anymore, but I can tell you. And Samuel, I'm paying attention." Before I could ask what he had seen, Howard said he had another call coming in. He promised to talk soon and hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear even after the line went dead, trying to understand what Ruth had known. What had she prepared for? What had she seen coming that I had missed entirely? I went back to the shop the next day, determined to assert myself. But when I arrived, another meeting was already in progress. Through the glass window of the conference room, I could see Lauren presenting charts to a group of employees I barely recognized. Ethan sat beside her, nodding along. No one had told me about this meeting. No one had asked for my input. I was still the founder. My name was still on every legal document, but no one waited for my voice anymore. I was still the founder, yet no one waited for my voice. I found the truth by accident. That is how betrayals often reveal themselves, not through dramatic confrontations or tearful confessions, but through careless mistakes made by people who have grown too confident in their deception. It was a Thursday afternoon, unremarkable in every way, when I walked into the small office we used for administrative work. I needed to print a copy of an old invoice for my personal records. The printer was already warm, which meant someone had used it recently. And sitting in the output tray, forgotten by whoever had left in a hurry, was a stack of documents that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my own family. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. The papers were dense with legal language, the kind of formal phrasing that lawyers use to obscure meaning behind complexity. But certain words jumped out at me as I flipped through the pages. Transfer agreement, corporate restructuring, asset reallocation. I saw the name of my shop. The name Ruth and I had chosen together 40 years ago, embedded in paragraphs that discussed ownership percentages and management authority. And then I saw the new company name, one I had never heard before, listed as the receiving entity for all assets and operations. I turned to the organizational chart on the final page, and my blood turned to ice. Lauren Crowley was listed as Chief Executive Officer. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had smiled so kindly while handing me papers to sign, was now officially in charge of everything I had built. Beneath her name was Ethan Crowley, listed as Chairman of the Board, my son, my only child, the boy I had raised in this very shop, teaching him to measure twice and cut once, hoping he would one day carry our legacy forward. My name appeared nowhere on the document, not as owner, not as founder, not as consultant or advisor or even honorary board member. According to these papers, I did not exist. My shop, my life's work, the foundation Ruth and I had poured our souls into for 4 decades, had been reorganized into a new entity without my knowledge, without my consent, without so much as a conversation. I flipped back through the pages, searching for some explanation, some loophole, some indication that this was a draft or a proposal rather than a completed transaction. But every page told the same story. The documents were signed and dated. The transfers had been executed. The restructuring was already complete. And then I saw the signatures. Ethan's handwriting was unmistakable. I had watched him learn to write his name as a child, had seen it evolve from shaky childhood letters to the confident script of an adult. His signature appeared on every critical page: authorization for transfer, approval of new corporate structure, confirmation of asset reallocation. Each signature was deliberate, careful, unhesitating. These were not documents he had signed under duress or confusion. He had read them. He had understood them. He had chosen to sign his father out of the business his father had built. I do not know how long I stood there holding those papers, staring at my son's handwriting. Time lost meaning. The sounds of the shop faded into silence. All I could see was Ethan's signature repeated again and again, each one a knife wound I had not felt until that moment. This was not Lauren's manipulation alone. She may have orchestrated it, may have pushed and planned and maneuvered, but Ethan had made a choice. He had looked at documents that erased his father's legacy and decided to sign them anyway. Something broke inside me, not my heart, though that was damaged too. Something deeper, the belief that family meant loyalty, the trust that a son would never betray his father, the faith that love, even imperfect love, even love expressed through work instead of words, meant something. All of it crumbled like ash. I walked to my desk in a daze. The wooden box sat where it had always been, untouched for 2 years, holding Ruth's 3 sealed envelopes. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Envelope number 1 felt heavier than it should have weighted with whatever truth Ruth had left behind. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Her handwriting was neat and steady, the familiar script I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes left on my pillow. But these words were different. They carried a weight that pressed against my chest as I read. Samuel. The letter began. If you're reading this, it means our son has chosen the wrong path. I prayed this day would never come. I prayed that the love we gave him would be enough. But I've watched Ethan for years, and I've seen something in him that worries me. A hunger for recognition that borders on desperation, a resentment toward you that he tries to hide but cannot fully conceal. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped time would soften whatever wounds he carries, but hope is not a strategy, and I refuse to leave you unprotected. I had to stop reading. My eyes were blurring and my throat had closed around a grief I could not name. Ruth had known. Somehow, years before this moment, she had seen what I had missed entirely. She had looked at our son and recognized the seeds of betrayal that I had been too blind to notice. I forced myself to continue. Don't grieve, the letter said. Don't rage, observe. I have prepared everything. Howard knows what to do. He has instructions and he will follow them when the time is right. Trust him as you would trust me. And Samuel, remember this, the one who brings papers first is not the one who wants to help you. I read that last sentence 3 times, trying to understand its meaning. The one who brings papers first. My mind flashed back to the kitchen table, to Lauren, sliding documents across the surface, to her red fingernails pointing at signature lines. She had been the first to bring papers, the power of attorney, the temporary management arrangement. She had brought them with a kind smile and reassuring words, and I had signed without question. Ruth had tried to warn me. Even from beyond the grave, she had tried to protect me. I sat in silence for hours, holding her letter, listening to the hum of machines in the shop that no longer belonged to me. Outside my office window, employees walked past without glancing in my direction. The business Ruth and I had built together continued to operate indifferent to the devastation unfolding in this small room. My own son had signed me out of my life's work, but my wife, my Ruth, had seen it coming. Every instinct in my body screamed for confrontation. I wanted to storm into Ethan's office, slam those documents on his desk, and demand to know how he could do this to me. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until the son I remembered came back, until the boy who used to sit in the corner of the shop doing homework looked at me with something other than cold calculation. I wanted to rage. I wanted to fight. I wanted to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done. But Ruth's letter would not leave my mind. Her words echoed like a bell that kept ringing long after it had been struck. Don't rage, observe. I remembered something she used to tell me during difficult times when customers were unreasonable or competitors tried to undercut us. She would put her hand on my arm and say, "Never fight when they think you're weak, Samuel. Fight when they've already won. That's when they stop watching." At the time, I thought it was just Ruth being Ruth, finding poetic ways to counsel patience. Now I understood. She had been training me for this moment without either of us knowing it, so I said nothing. I swallowed my anger like bitter medicine and continued attending meetings as if nothing had changed. I nodded politely when Lauren presented her reports. I smiled at Ethan across the conference table. I played the role of a tired old man who had accepted his diminished place in the world. It was the hardest performance of my life. Every time I saw my son's face, I thought of his signature on those documents, deliberate and unhesitating. Every time Lauren called me father, in that syrupy voice, I wanted to tell her I knew exactly what she was. But I held my tongue. I watched. I waited. I let them believe they had already won. The first call I made was to Howard. I drove to a payphone outside of town, paranoid that my cell phone might somehow be monitored. It sounds foolish now, but betrayal makes you suspicious of everything. Howard answered on the second ring, and I told him everything. The documents in this printer, the new company structure, Lauren as CEO, Ethan as chairman, my name erased completely. I told him about Ruth's letter, the warning she had left behind, the cryptic sentence about the one who brings papers first. Howard listened without interrupting, his silence heavy on the other end of the line. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Ruth gave me something too," he said. "A sealed envelope. She made me promise not to open it until Ethan made his biggest mistake." My grip tightened on the phone. "What's inside?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Howard admitted. "She told me the timing matters more than the content. She said I would know when the moment came and that opening it too early would ruin everything." I wanted to press him to demand he open it immediately and share whatever secrets Ruth had entrusted to him, but something in his voice stopped me. Howard was following Ruth's instructions with the same faith I was trying to summon. She had given us each a piece of the puzzle, and we had to trust that the pieces would come together when they were meant to. Howard agreed to help me observe without interfering. He would continue doing business with the shop, continue attending meetings with Lauren and Ethan, and he would report anything unusual. "I've been watching anyway," he admitted. "Ruth asked me to keep an eye on things years ago. I thought I was just being a good friend. Now I understand she was preparing for something she hoped would never happen." A few days later, I met with Frank, a machinist who had worked at the shop for 20 years before leaving 3 months ago. We sat in a diner across town, far from anyone who might recognize us, and I asked him why he had really left. Frank stirred his coffee for a long time before answering. His hands were rough and scarred, the hands of a man who understood metal the way I did, who respected the craft we had built our lives around. "Ethan changed a long time ago, sir," Frank finally said. "Even before Mrs. Ruth passed, I used to see him sitting alone in the back office late at night when he thought everyone had gone home. He'd be writing things on paper, then tearing them up, then writing again, over and over. He looked angry, not at anyone in particular, just angry at something I couldn't see." Frank shook his head. "I always thought he'd grow out of it, thought maybe he was just going through a rough patch. But after Mrs. Ruth died, it got worse. He stopped pretending to be friendly, started treating the old-timers like we were in his way." Frank looked at me with eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner, Mr. Samuel. I didn't want to cause trouble between you and your son." I thanked Frank and paid for his coffee. On the drive home, his words kept replaying in my mind. Ethan had been planning something for years. The anger Frank described, the obsessive writing and tearing, the gradual hardening of his demeanor. This betrayal was not a sudden impulse or a recent manipulation by Lauren. It had roots that stretched back further than I wanted to believe. Ruth had seen it. She had tried to warn me in her own way, and now I had to uncover how deep those roots really went. My final step was hiring an attorney. Not the company lawyers who handled contracts and liability who owed their paychecks to whoever signed them, but someone independent. I found a woman named Patricia Vance through a recommendation from an old friend, a lawyer with a reputation for discretion and a specialty in corporate fraud. I sat in her office and laid out everything, the documents, the signatures, the power of attorney I had signed without reading carefully. She took notes without judgment, her expression unreadable. "The question," she said when I finished, "is whether the restructuring exceeded the scope of the authority you granted. Power of attorney has limits. If they transferred assets or created new corporate entities beyond what you authorized, there may be grounds to challenge the entire arrangement." She promised a thorough investigation and warned me it would take time. I told her time was the one thing I had plenty of. When I returned to the shop that afternoon, Lauren greeted me with her usual polished smile. "Good to see you, Father. We missed you at this morning's meeting." I smiled back, the picture of a defeated old man grateful for any attention. "Just running some errands," I said. "Nothing important." They mistook my silence for surrender. They didn't know I was following Ruth's map. The decision to walk away was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every fiber of my being resisted it. That shop was not just a business to me. It was the place where Ruth and I had built our dreams, where we had celebrated victories and weathered failures, where our son had taken his first steps across a concrete floor, dusted with metal shavings. Leaving it felt like abandoning a piece of my own soul. But Ruth's voice whispered in my memory, steady and certain, "Observe, don't rage." And sometimes observation requires distance. I called a meeting with Ethan and Lauren. They looked surprised when I requested it, exchanging a quick glance that confirmed what I already suspected. They had grown comfortable with my silence, accustomed to my passive presence at meetings where I nodded and said nothing. A meeting called by me was unexpected, perhaps even alarming. Good. Let them wonder. We sat in the conference room, the same room where Ruth used to lead our quarterly reviews with her gentle authority. Lauren had redecorated since then. New chairs, a larger table, abstract art on the walls that meant nothing. I looked at my son across that polished surface and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I've been thinking," I began, keeping my voice tired and slow, "about what's best for everyone. I'm 70 years old. My wife is gone. The energy I used to have for this business just isn't there anymore." I paused, letting the words settle. Lauren leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with barely concealed anticipation. Ethan shifted in his chair, his expression a mixture of relief and something that might have been guilt. "I want to enjoy whatever time I have left," I continued. "Travel maybe, tend to Ruth's garden, stop worrying about orders and deadlines and things that younger people should be handling." I spread my hands in a gesture of surrender. "The shop is in capable hands. You've proven that. I'm officially stepping back from all daily operations. Consider this my retirement." The transformation in Lauren's face was remarkable. The careful mask she always wore slipped just enough to reveal the triumph underneath. Her smile wide and genuine, for once the smile of someone who had just won a prize they had been coveting for years. "Father," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "that's such a wise decision. You deserve to rest. You've worked so hard for so long." Ethan exhaled slowly, like a man who had been holding his breath without realizing it. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "We'll take care of everything. I promise." The words sounded rehearsed, empty of real meaning. I wondered if he even heard himself anymore, or if Lauren's voice had completely replaced his own. I stood up, shook their hands, and walked out of the building I had built with my own 2 hands. Behind me, I heard Lauren already making phone calls, her voice energized with new purpose. She did not waste a single moment. The old man was finally gone, and her real work could begin. What followed was exactly what I expected, only faster. Within days, Lauren began dismantling everything Ruth and I had created. She fired 3 more longtime employees, including the shop foreman who had been with us for 18 years. She terminated contracts with suppliers we had trusted for decades, replacing them with cheaper alternatives she found through online searches. She renegotiated agreements with clients, pushing for higher margins and faster payment terms, dismissing concerns about quality with phrases like industry standard and competitive necessity. Ethan followed her lead without questioning. I heard reports from Frank, who still had friends inside the shop, about how my son had become Lauren's echo. Whatever she proposed, he approved. Whatever she demanded, he delivered. The man I had raised, the boy who used to ask thoughtful questions about metallurgy and craftsmanship, had been reduced to a rubber stamp for his wife's ambitions. The shop's culture transformed completely. Efficiency replaced warmth. Profit replaced relationships. New employees walked the floors with clipboards and stopwatches, measuring productivity in ways that had nothing to do with quality. The old ways, the ways Ruth and I had built over 4 decades, were erased like chalk from a blackboard. Customers noticed. I heard whispers from people I had known for years, complaints about changed attitudes and declining service. The shop still functioned, but its heart had been removed. I observed everything from a distance. I kept a notebook, the kind Ruth used to use for her records, and I documented every change I learned about: names of fired employees, dates of terminated contracts, details of new policies that prioritize short-term profit over long-term relationships. My attorney, Patricia, continued her investigation into the restructuring documents, but I knew that legal action alone would not be enough. I needed to understand the full scope of what Lauren was building before I could tear it down. I also began visiting old clients, not to interfere, not to complain, but simply to listen. I would stop by their offices or meet them for coffee, asking how business was going, letting them talk. Several mentioned Lauren without prompting. One contractor, a man named Bill, who had worked with us for 15 years, shook his head and said, "She came in here like she owned the place, Samuel." Talked down to my purchasing manager, demanded we sign a new agreement on the spot or lose priority status. He looked at me with sympathy. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause problems for you, but honestly, if things don't change, I'm taking my business elsewhere." I thanked Bill and made a note in my book. The pattern was clear. Lauren was burning bridges faster than she could build new ones. Her arrogance was alienating the very people who had made our shop successful. She thought business was about leverage and contracts. She didn't understand that in our industry, reputation was everything. 1 week after my retirement announcement, the first real crack appeared. Frank called me late one evening, his voice tense. "There's a problem, Mr. Samuel, a big one." He explained that a production batch destined for Howard's company had been shipped with substandard materials. Lauren had approved a cheaper metal alloy to cut costs, and the quality control manager, one of her new hires, had signed off without proper testing. The defective products were already on their way to Howard's construction site, where they would be used in structural applications. I felt a chill run down my spine. Howard's projects were not small renovations. They were commercial buildings, schools, hospitals. Substandard materials in those applications could mean catastrophic failure. People could be hurt, lives could be at risk. And Howard, my wife's oldest friend, would bear the responsibility for trusting a shop that had betrayed him. I thanked Frank and sat in the darkness of my living room for a long time. Ruth's wooden box sat on the desk across the room, holding her remaining letters. Outside, crickets sang their endless song. The trap Lauren had built for me was becoming a trap for herself. Every shortcut, every cost-cutting measure, every arrogant negotiation was another thread in a web that would eventually collapse under its own weight. They didn't realize I wasn't retreating. I was letting them build their own trap. The truth arrived in pieces, each one more painful than the last. I had spent weeks believing that Lauren was the architect of my destruction, that she had manipulated my grieving son into betraying his own father. It was easier to believe that. It allowed me to hold on to the image of Ethan as a victim, a weak man led astray by a calculating wife. But the evidence Patricia uncovered shattered that comforting illusion completely. She called me to her office on a gray Tuesday morning, her voice unusually somber on the phone. When I arrived, she had documents spread across her desk in neat rows, organized chronologically. "I need you to sit down for this," she said. "What I found changes everything." The paper trail began 3 years ago. 3 years. Ruth was still alive, then still tending her lilies, still filling our home with warmth and laughter. And while she was doing that, while I was working beside her in the shop we had built together, our son was meeting with business attorneys in another city. The consultations were documented meticulously, discussions about succession planning, corporate restructuring, asset protection strategies. Ethan had paid for these meetings from a personal account I never knew existed, using cash withdrawals that left no obvious trace. Patricia pointed to a series of emails recovered from a backup server. He was exploring ways to transfer ownership without triggering gift taxes or requiring your explicit consent, she explained. The attorneys advised him to wait to find the right legal mechanism. Then about 18 months ago, he brought in a new consultant. She slid another document across the desk. That's when Lauren's name first appears in the records. I stared at the timeline, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with the son I thought I knew. Lauren had not created this plan. She had joined it. Ethan had been building the framework for betrayal long before she accelerated its execution. She was the gasoline, but he had been gathering the kindling for years. Ruth's warning echoed in my mind with new clarity. The one who brings papers first is not the one who wants to help you. After Ruth died when I was drowning in grief, Ethan had been the first to appear at my kitchen table with legal documents. The power of attorney. The temporary management arrangement. He had presented them with concern in his voice and sympathy in his eyes, and I had signed because I trusted my son. I trusted him because he was my son. Ruth had known. Somehow, impossibly, she had seen through our child in ways I could not. She had recognized the danger he posed and tried to warn me without accusing him directly. Perhaps she hoped she was wrong. Perhaps she prayed that her words would never need to be understood. But she had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best, and now I understood why her letters carried such specific instructions. I needed to know why. The mechanics of the betrayal were clear enough, but the motivation remained a mystery. Ethan was not a greedy person by nature. He had never cared much about money or material possessions. What could drive a son to spend years planning the destruction of his own father? The answer came from an unexpected source. Frank connected me with Margaret, the accountant, who had taken early retirement months ago. We met at a park bench far from town, and she spoke in hushed tones even though no one was nearby. "There's something you should know," she said. "Something that happened about 4 years ago before Mrs. Ruth got sick." Margaret had overheard a conversation in the break room, one she was not meant to hear. Ethan had been talking to Ruth, his voice strained with frustration. He was asking her to intervene to convince me to give him more authority in the shop. He said he'd earned it, Margaret recalled. He said he'd worked there his whole life and deserved to be treated like a partner, not an employee. I asked what Ruth had said in response. Margaret looked at me with something like pity. She told him no. She said he would have it when he deserved it, not when he demanded it. She said respect couldn't be taken, only given. Margaret paused. He didn't raise his voice. He just went very quiet. And then he walked out without another word. I'd never seen him look like that before, like something inside him had broken. The words hit me like a physical blow. Ethan had asked his mother for help and she had refused him. She had held firm to principles I had always admired, the belief that authority must be earned through demonstrated character, not claimed through birthright. But to Ethan, that refusal must have felt like rejection. Not just from his mother, but from both of us. From the entire legacy he had grown up believing would someday be his. I thought back over the years, trying to see them through my son's eyes. He had always lived in my shadow at the shop. Customers asked about me, not him. Employees compared his decisions to mine. Every success was attributed to the foundation I had built. Every failure was blamed on his inexperience. I had never meant to diminish him. I had simply assumed that my love was obvious, that my pride in him was understood even when unspoken. But Ruth had always been my translator. Without her, my silence must have felt like indifference. Ethan's betrayal was not about money. It was never about money. It was about proving that he mattered, that he was capable, that he could build something without his father's name attached to every achievement. He wanted respect so desperately that he was willing to destroy everything to get it. The irony was devastating. In trying to escape my shadow, he had become exactly the kind of man who deserved to stand in it. I sat with this knowledge for days, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. Lauren was still dangerous, still cold and calculating, still willing to commit crimes to achieve her goals. But Ethan was something more complicated. He was wounded. He had spent his entire life feeling invisible in a place that should have been his home, and that wound had festered into something poisonous. I didn't know how to fight pain with strategy. Legal documents and evidence could defeat Lauren, but they could not heal whatever had broken inside my son. Ruth had understood this. That was why she had prepared multiple letters, why she had involved Howard, why her instructions were about observation rather than immediate action. She knew that saving the shop was only part of the battle. The harder fight would be deciding whether to save Ethan too. My son didn't follow betrayal. He planned it, and the wound ran deeper than greed. Understanding my son's pain did not make watching his failure any easier. In the weeks that followed my discovery, I observed from a distance as Ethan tried to lead the shop he had stolen. He had the title now. He had the authority. He had everything he thought he wanted. But leadership requires more than a nameplate on a door. It requires trust. And trust was something Ethan had never learned to build. The employees followed his orders because they had no choice. They showed up on time, completed their tasks, collected their paychecks. But there was no loyalty in their compliance. When I ran the shop, workers would come to me with problems before they became crises. They would offer suggestions, point out inefficiencies, warn me when something felt wrong. That flow of information had been the lifeblood of our operations, an early warning system built on mutual respect. Under Ethan's leadership, that system collapsed entirely. Frank kept me informed through his network of former colleagues still working inside. The picture he painted was bleak. When problems arose on the production floor, no one told Ethan until it was too late to fix them quietly. Mistakes were hidden, blamed on equipment or materials, anything to avoid drawing attention. When decisions failed, employees pointed fingers at each other rather than working together to find solutions. The shop that Ruth and I had built on relationships now ran on fear, and fear is a brittle foundation. It holds weight only until the first real pressure arrives, then it shatters. Lauren made everything worse. She pushed Ethan toward increasingly risky decisions, always chasing higher margins and faster returns. Deeper cost cuts that compromised quality. Aggressive contract terms that alienated longtime customers, unrealistic delivery promises that put impossible pressure on the production team. She approached every challenge with spreadsheets and calculations, treating the business like a math problem that could be optimized through clever formulas. What Lauren did not understand, what she could not see from her position of artificial authority, was the human infrastructure holding everything together. Our industry was built on relationships that predated contracts by decades. Old-school clients like Howard valued handshakes over legal fine print. They did business with people they trusted, and they walked away from people who treated them like line items on a balance sheet. Lauren's aggressive negotiations might have worked in some corporate boardroom, but in our world, they were poison. Every bridge she burned was a relationship that had taken years to build, and would take years more to rebuild if it could be rebuilt at all. I continued my quiet investigation during this time, reviewing documents Patricia had gathered and comparing them against records I had kept in my own files at home. Ruth had always encouraged me to maintain personal copies of important paperwork, a habit I had considered paranoid until now. Late one evening, while cross-referencing signature pages from different years, I noticed something that made me stop cold. Some of my signatures looked different. The differences were subtle, easy to miss if you were not looking for them. The handwriting was close, clearly an attempt to match my natural style. But the pressure of the pen was wrong. My signature had a particular weight to it, a heaviness in the downstrokes that came from decades of signing documents quickly while thinking about other things. These signatures were lighter, more careful, as if someone had been tracing rather than writing naturally. The slight tilt of certain letters was off by a degree or two, imperceptible, unless you placed the documents side by side under good light. I could not be certain. Signatures vary naturally over time, affected by mood fatigue, the quality of the pen, 100 small factors. But the pattern troubled me. The suspicious signatures appeared primarily on documents from the past 18 months, the period after Ruth's death when I had been too grief-stricken to pay attention. I mentioned my concerns to Patricia during our next meeting. She listened carefully, made notes, and added possible signature forgery to her investigation list. If these signatures were fake, it meant Lauren had crossed a line from aggressive business tactics into criminal fraud. That changed everything. A few days later, I received an unexpected phone call. The caller was Tom Bradley, owner of a small construction company that had been buying custom brackets from us for about 8 years. His voice carried the hesitant tone of someone delivering bad news. "Mr. Crowley," he said, "I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I wasn't sure who else to talk to." I assured him I was happy to hear from him and asked what was on his mind. "There are rumors going around," Tom said carefully, "about quality problems at your shop. Some folks are saying the materials aren't what they used to be, that corners are being cut." He paused. "Is it true? Because I've got a project coming up and I need to know if I can still count on you." The question caught me off guard. The quality issues with Howard's shipment had not been made public. Lauren had managed to contain that situation, or so she believed. If rumors were spreading through the industry, someone inside the shop was talking. Someone was leaking information that should have stayed confidential. I thanked Tom for his honesty and promised to look into it personally. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about what he had said. Rumors did not spread on their own. Someone had started them, someone with access to internal information and a reason to share it. Was it a disgruntled employee, a competitor with a source inside our walls, or something more deliberate? The answer came indirectly a week later. I learned through an industry contact that one of our main competitors had begun offering prices on custom fabrication work that were suspiciously close to our internal cost structures. Not just competitive, but almost identical, as if they had access to our exact pricing formulas. The margins they were accepting would have been impossible to calculate without knowing precisely what we charged for materials, labor, and overhead. Someone was feeding them information. Someone inside the shop was betraying not just me, but the entire business. And given Lauren's willingness to bend rules for personal advantage, I had to wonder if the leak was intentional. Perhaps she was preparing an exit strategy. Perhaps she was building relationships with competitors in case her current scheme collapsed. Whatever the explanation, the cracks in her carefully constructed empire were multiplying faster than she could patch them. They had control. They had my shop, my legacy, everything I had built over 40 years. But they did not have loyalty, and without loyalty, control is just noise. The consequences arrived exactly 1 week later. I had known they were coming. From the moment Frank told me about the defective shipment to Howard's company, I understood that a reckoning was inevitable. Substandard materials in construction applications do not simply disappear. They fail, inspections cause delays, create liability. And when they fail, someone has to pay the price. Howard called me before he called anyone at the shop. His voice was tight with controlled anger, the kind of fury that burns cold rather than hot. "Samuel," he said, "I need you to know what happened, not because I blame you, but because you deserve to hear it from me first." The story was worse than I had feared. Howard's construction crew had installed the brackets from our defective batch in a commercial building downtown, a medical office complex that was supposed to open in 6 weeks. The building inspector caught the problem during a routine check. The metal alloy was wrong, too soft for the load-bearing requirements specified in the engineering plans. Every single bracket had to be removed and replaced. The entire project ground to a halt while Howard's team scrambled to source proper materials from another supplier. The damage was measurable and devastating. $200,000 in rework costs, including overtime labor and expedited shipping for replacement parts. Penalties from the property developer for missing the contracted completion date. And worst of all, a damaged reputation with clients who had trusted Howard to deliver quality work on time. He had spent 40 years building that reputation. One shipment from my shop, from the shop that bore my name, had put a crack in everything he had achieved. "I'm not angry at you, Samuel," Howard said, and I could hear the exhaustion beneath his words. "I know you had nothing to do with this. But your shop, the one you and Ruth built, it's not the same place anymore. The people running it now, they don't understand what they're playing with. They think business is just numbers on a page. They don't see that every number represents a person who trusted us." I listened in silence, feeling the weight of his disappointment like a physical burden. Howard had been Ruth's friend since childhood. He had stood beside me at her funeral, had held my hand when I could not stop the tears. His loyalty to our shop had never been about contracts or pricing. It had been about decades of shared history of promises kept and standards maintained. Lauren and Ethan had inherited that loyalty without understanding its foundation, and they had squandered it in weeks. The formal notification arrived at the shop the next morning. Howard's company was reviewing their 10-year contract with us, citing breach of quality standards as grounds for potential termination. The contract was worth 40% of our annual revenue. Losing it would not just hurt the business, it would cripple it. The notification was carefully worded, legally precise, giving them 90 days to remedy the situation or face cancellation. But everyone who read it understood the real message. Howard was done. Frank told me about the reaction inside the shop. Lauren went pale when she saw the letter. For the first time since she had taken control, her composure cracked. She paced her office for hours, making phone calls, drafting responses, trying to find some angle that would fix the unfixable. Ethan was worse. He sat at his desk, staring at the notification as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. The confidence he had worn like armor since signing those transfer documents had vanished completely. They tried calling Howard directly. His assistant said he was unavailable. They tried emailing him. No response. They sent a formal letter promising corrective actions and quality improvements. It came back unopened, marked "Return to Sender." Howard was not interested in promises from people who had already broken their word. He wanted accountability, and Lauren and Ethan had none to offer. The phone rang late that evening. I was sitting in my living room reading one of Ruth's old gardening books, trying to find some peace in the familiar comfort of her handwriting in the margins. When I saw Ethan's name on the caller ID, I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Dad." His voice cracked on the single syllable. I had not heard him sound like that since he was a teenager calling me from a friend's house after getting into trouble he could not handle alone. "Dad, we need your help. Howard won't take our calls. He won't respond to anything we send. But he respects you. He's always respected you. Please, just talk to him. Convince him to give us another chance." I held the phone in silence, listening to my son's desperation echo through the receiver. This was the same son who had planned my removal for 3 years. The same son who had signed documents erasing my name from everything I had built. The same son who had looked me in the eye and accepted my trust while plotting to betray it. Now he needed me. Now, when the consequences of his choices had become too heavy to carry alone, he remembered that he had a father. Part of me wanted to help him. That instinct runs deep, carved into the bones of every parent who has ever loved a child. I wanted to pick up the phone call Howard smooth everything over the way I had smoothed over so many problems throughout my career. I wanted to fix it because fixing things was what I did, what I had always done. But Ruth's voice whispered in my memory, "Don't rage, observe." And I understood finally what she had been trying to teach me. Some lessons cannot be taught through rescue. Some growth only happens through failure. If I saved Ethan now, he would learn nothing except that his father would always be there to clean up his messes. He would never face the true weight of what he had done. He would never understand why trust matters more than contracts, why relationships cannot be rebuilt with apologies alone. I took a breath and spoke quietly into the phone. "Let the air handle it." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Ethan breathing, could almost feel his shock traveling through the cellular signal. He had expected me to help. He had assumed that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the stolen legacy, his father would still come running when called. That assumption had been his last safety net, and I had just cut it away. "Dad," he whispered, "please." "You wanted this," I said. "You planned it. You signed the papers. You built this situation with your own hands. Now you have to live in it." I hung up before he could respond. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock Ruth had bought at an estate sale years ago. I sat in the darkness, holding the phone, waiting to feel victorious. But victory did not come. Only sorrow, deep and heavy, for the son I had failed to understand and the man he had chosen to become. I called Howard an hour later. "Don't save them yet," I said. "Let him see what he's done." Howard agreed. The test was not over. That sentence broke something in Ethan. For the first time, he saw what he had become. Howard called me 2 days later. His voice was different from our previous conversations, quieter and more deliberate, as if he had been thinking carefully about each word before speaking. "We need to meet," he said. "Not at the shop, not at your house, somewhere neutral." He suggested a diner on the outskirts of a neighboring town, a place where neither of us would be recognized. I agreed without asking why. Something in his tone told me this meeting would change everything. The diner was the kind of place that time had forgotten. Cracked vinyl booths, a counter, with spinning stools, coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the previous administration. Howard was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. He looked tired in a way I had never seen before, the exhaustion of a man carrying a burden he was finally ready to set down. I slid into the seat across from him. A waitress appeared, poured coffee without asking, and disappeared. Howard wrapped his hands around his cup but didn't drink. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy with unasked questions. "It's time," Howard finally said. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope yellowed with age and placed it on the table between us. "Ruth gave me this 7 years ago. She made me promise not to open it until the moment was right. She said I would know when that moment came." He pushed the envelope toward me. I opened it the night I received that defective shipment. "I've read it a dozen times since then. Now you need to read it too." My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. Ruth's handwriting was on the front, spelling out Howard's name in the elegant script I knew so well. The paper was thick, the kind she used for important correspondence. I broke the seal carefully, as if handling something sacred, and unfolded the letter inside. Her voice came through the words immediately, so clear that I could almost hear her speaking beside me. "Dear Howard," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means my son has made the mistake I've feared for years. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I have watched Ethan for a long time, and I have seen something in him that troubles me deeply. He carries a wound that neither Samuel nor I know how to heal. He feels invisible, unworthy, desperate to prove himself in ways that may lead him down a dark path. I have tried to guide him, but some lessons cannot be taught by mothers. They must be learned through consequence." I had to stop reading. The coffee in front of me blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Ruth had known, 7 years ago, while she was still healthy, still laughing, still filling our home with light. She had looked at our son and seen the betrayal that was coming. She had prepared for it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else in her life. I forced myself to continue. "Howard, I need you to do something for me. When Ethan makes his mistake, when the consequences come due, do not save the shop for Samuel's sake. Samuel's love is too forgiving. He will want to rescue our son before the lesson is learned. He will want to fix everything the way he always fixes everything, with his hands and his heart and his endless capacity for second chances. But some second chances come too soon. If you give Ethan an easy way out, he will take it and learn nothing." The next paragraph made my breath catch. "Let Ethan see the consequences. Let him feel the weight of what he has done. Let him understand that trust once broken cannot be rebuilt with apologies alone." But Howard, if Ethan truly wants to make amends, if he chooses family over pride, if he shows genuine remorse rather than mere regret, give him one chance. Not because he deserves it, he may not deserve it at all, but because Samuel will never find peace if he loses his son completely. I know my husband. I know that his heart will break if there is no path back to reconciliation. Give Ethan that path, but only if he earns it, only if he proves he has changed. The letter ended with words that pierced me to the core. "You know me, Howard. I have never wanted revenge. I want restoration. I want my son to become the man he was meant to be. I want my husband to find peace. And I want you, my oldest friend, to help me protect them both when I'm no longer there to do it myself. Thank you for everything. I love you. Ruth." I read the letter 3 times before I could speak. Each reading revealed new layers of meaning, new evidence of Ruth's extraordinary foresight. She had planned everything not to punish Ethan, but to create conditions where genuine transformation was possible. She had understood my weaknesses better than I understood them myself. She knew I would rush to rescue our son the moment he stumbled. She knew my forgiveness came too easily, that my love sometimes prevented accountability, so she had asked Howard to be the boundary I could not set myself. Howard watched me in silence as I processed what I had read. When I finally looked up, his eyes were moist. "I didn't withdraw the contract to punish your shop," he said quietly. "I did it because Ruth asked me to. She knew this day would come. She knew Ethan would only change if he hit bottom, if he felt the full weight of his choices without anyone there to cushion the fall." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "She also knew you would catch him eventually. This was never about destroying your son Samuel. It was about rebuilding him on honest ground." I sat in that faded diner booth holding my wife's letter, understanding for the first time the full scope of what she had done. Ruth had not left me instructions for revenge. She had left me a framework for redemption. Every piece, from the letters to Howard's involvement to the carefully worded warnings, was designed to create a moment of reckoning that could become a moment of healing. Her final gift was not protection from pain. It was protection through pain. She had known that Ethan's wound would never heal unless it was first fully exposed. She had known that my relationship with our son would never be authentic unless it was first completely broken. And she had trusted that when the breaking was complete, when all the pretense had been stripped away, there would be an opportunity to build something real in its place. Ruth had seen the future, and she had built a safety net not to catch Ethan, but to teach him how to fall. Pressure reveals character. Ruth used to say that usually when describing someone who had disappointed her. She believed that human beings showed their true nature not in times of comfort, but in moments of crisis. When everything is going well, anyone can appear generous and kind. But when the walls start closing in, when fear takes hold, that is when masks slip and the real face emerges. I thought about those words often in the days that followed my meeting with Howard. I was about to see Lauren's true face, and it was uglier than even I had imagined. Howard told me about her first mistake during one of our quiet phone calls. Desperate to stop the contract withdrawal, Lauren had done something breathtakingly foolish. She threatened him. She sent a formal letter from the company's legal department citing obscure breach of partnership terms, demanding compensation for the revenue loss his withdrawal would cause. The letter was full of aggressive language and legal jargon designed to intimidate rather than negotiate. She seemed to believe that Howard would back down if she pushed hard enough, that fear of litigation would outweigh his anger over the defective shipment. She had badly miscalculated. Howard had been in business for 50 years. He had faced lawyers far more talented than whoever Lauren had hired. His legal team reviewed her letter, found it riddled with overreach and unsupported claims, and drafted a response that methodically dismantled every argument she had made. More importantly, Howard was not a man who responded to threats. He was old school from an era when a handshake meant more than a 100-page contract. Lauren's aggression only confirmed what he already believed. She cared nothing about relationships, nothing about trust, nothing about anything except her own advancement. He forwarded her letter to me with a single comment: Ruth was right about her. The real devastation came from Patricia. She called me early on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for. "I need you to come to my office," she said. "Today, I have findings that change everything." I drove across town with a growing sense of anticipation. Patricia was not a dramatic person. If she said something changed everything, she meant it. When I arrived, she had documents spread across her conference table, organized into two distinct piles. She pointed to the first pile. "Forgery," she said simply. "I had a handwriting expert examine the signatures you were concerned about. His conclusion is definitive. At least 7 documents in the corporate restructuring process bear signatures that were not made by your hand. Someone traced your signature from other documents and copied it onto authorization forms that expanded Lauren's authority far beyond what the original power of attorney allowed." She paused to let that sink in. "This is criminal fraud, Samuel. We're not talking about aggressive business tactics anymore. We're talking about a felony." I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was telling me. Lauren had forged my signature. She had committed a crime to steal my company gambling that I would never look closely enough to notice. The audacity of it stunned me. She had sat across from me at that kitchen table, smiling her polished smile, handing me papers to sign, all while planning to commit fraud if the legitimate documents were not enough. Patricia moved to the second pile. "This is worse," she said. "During my investigation, I obtained records of Lauren's email communications through a legal discovery process. She has been in contact with a competitor for the past 4 months, not casual contact, substantive exchanges. She shared internal pricing data, customer lists, production costs, supplier contracts." Patricia's expression hardened. She was preparing an exit strategy. If the shop failed, she planned to jump to the competition, bringing valuable intelligence as her entry gift. Your shop's confidential information was her insurance policy. Corporate espionage. The word felt foreign, something from spy novels and business thrillers, not from my small-town metal fabrication shop. But the evidence was undeniable. Lauren had been selling us out while pretending to build us up. Every decision she made, every cost-cutting measure and aggressive negotiation had been designed to maximize short-term extraction before she abandoned ship. She never intended to build anything lasting. She was a parasite preparing to leap to a new host. Frank told me later what happened when Ethan found out. Patricia's findings had triggered certain disclosure requirements, and the information reached the shop's legal department before anyone could contain it. Ethan learned about the forgery first. Frank said he went pale, sitting at his desk for almost an hour without moving. He had believed Lauren's actions were aggressive but legal. He had trusted that whatever she did, it fell within the boundaries of legitimate business practice. Learning that she had committed crimes in his name, forged signatures on documents he thought were authentic, shattered that illusion completely. But it was the espionage that broke him. Frank was outside Ethan's office when the confrontation happened. The door was closed, but voices carried through the thin walls. Ethan's voice raw with disbelief. You were going to sell us out. You were going to take everything and leave me with nothing. This was supposed to be our future." Lauren's response was audible even through the door, and Frank said it made his blood run cold. Her voice was flat, emotionless, stripped of any pretense of warmth. "This is business, Ethan. You should learn to separate emotions from strategy. I made contingency plans. Any intelligent person would have done the same." Frank said there was a long silence after that. Then he heard Ethan say very quietly, "I don't know who you are. I don't think I ever did." The door opened a moment later and Ethan walked out without looking back. Frank said his face was the face of a man who had just watched something precious die. Word spread quickly through the business community. Our industry was small enough that news traveled fast, and news this explosive traveled faster. Other clients began reviewing their contracts with the shop, suddenly suspicious of every interaction they had with Lauren. Suppliers who had extended generous payment terms demanded faster settlement, worried about the shop's stability. Employees who remained grew nervous, updating their resumes, making quiet inquiries about positions elsewhere. The empire Lauren had tried to build was collapsing from within, undermined by her own greed. I watched it all from a distance, documenting every development, waiting for the final pieces to fall into place. The trap Lauren had constructed to imprison me had become her own cage. Every lie she told was now a bar. Every forged signature was another lock. She had built her strategy on the assumption that fear would keep everyone in line, that aggression and legal threats could substitute for genuine relationships. Lauren had gambled everything on fear, but this industry was built on trust, and she had none left. Frank called me that evening. His voice was hushed, almost reverent, like someone reporting from a hospital room. "Mr. Samuel," he said, "I think you need to come to the shop. Your son is here, alone. Everyone else went home hours ago, but he's still sitting in the main production area, just sitting there in the dark. I've never seen him like this." I drove through the quiet streets of our town, past houses where families were eating dinner and watching television, living ordinary lives untouched by betrayal. The shop was dark when I arrived, except for a single light near the back. I let myself in with the key. I had never surrendered the key that still fit, despite everything that had changed. Ethan was sitting on an old metal stool near the main fabrication station. The machines around him were silent, their familiar hum absent for the first time I could remember. He was staring at the floor, at the concrete his mother used to sweep every evening before closing, at the space where she would stand to call us both to dinner when I worked too late. He did not look up when I approached. I do not think he could. I pulled another stool close and sat down beside him. The silence stretched between us, filled with 40 years of unspoken words. I thought about all the times I should have told him I was proud of him, all the moments when I chose work over conversation, action over affection. Ruth had been my translator, she used to say. Without her, my love had become invisible to the son who needed to see it most. "I ruined everything," Ethan finally said. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw by emotions he had spent years suppressing. "Everything you and Mom built, everything that mattered, I destroyed it because I wanted—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Because you wanted to matter," I said quietly. "Because you wanted to be seen." He looked at me. Then his eyes red-rimmed and wet. "How did you know?" I reached into my jacket and withdrew the envelope I had carried with me since leaving the house. Ruth's handwriting was on the front, spelling out Ethan's name in her elegant script. The paper had yellowed slightly over the years, but her words inside remained as powerful as the day she wrote them. "Your mother left this for you," I said, placing the envelope in his hands. "She knew this day would come. She knew it before either of us wanted to admit it was possible. She wanted you to read it yourself when you were ready. I think you're ready now." Ethan stared at the envelope like it was a ghost. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. I watched him unfold the letter, watched his eyes move across the page, watched his face transform from confusion to recognition to something that looked like grief and relief intertwined. Ruth's letter to our son was everything she had always been: gentle and devastating, loving and honest, tender and unsparing. "Ethan," she had written, "if you're reading this from your father's hands, it means you've done what I feared you might do. I'm not angry with you. I want you to know that first before anything else. I'm not angry. I'm sad and I am worried, but I am not angry. Because I understand, sweetheart. I have always understood, even when you thought no one saw." I watched Ethan's jaw tighten as he continued reading. You wanted to be seen. You wanted to be valued. You wanted to be more than your father's shadow, more than the son who could never quite measure up to the legend everyone else remembered. I know how that feels. I watched you carry that weight since you were a teenager, and it broke my heart that I couldn't lift it from your shoulders. I tried in my own way. But some burdens can only be set down by the person carrying them. Ethan's hands were shaking now. A tear slipped down his cheek, the first I had seen from him since he was a child. But son, here is what I need you to understand. Respect is not something you can take. It has to be given. You cannot steal it, cannot demand it, cannot acquire it through clever paperwork or aggressive tactics. Respect is earned through character, through consistency, through showing up day after day and doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Your father has always respected you. He just didn't know how to say it. He showed his love through work, through providing, through building a future he thought you would want. He never realized you needed words more than walls. The letter continued, and I saw each sentence land on my son like gentle hammer blows, breaking through defenses he had spent years constructing. And now you have a choice, Ethan. Pride or family, the path you've been walking or a different one. I cannot make this choice for you. Your father cannot make it either. It has to come from inside you, from that place where you know the difference between who you've been and who you want to become. Choose carefully, my son. It's not too late, but it will be soon. The window for redemption doesn't stay open forever. Walk through it while you can. I love you. I have always loved you. Even now, especially now, I love you. Mom. Ethan read the letter 3 times. I sat beside him in silence, giving him space to absorb what his mother had left behind. When he finally looked up, his face was wet with tears, and something had changed in his eyes. The hardness I had seen for months, the defensive arrogance that Lauren had cultivated, had cracked open. Beneath it was the boy I remembered, lost and hurting and desperate for connection. She knew, he whispered. She knew everything. She saw exactly who I was, exactly what I would do, and she still... He could not finish. She still loved you, I said. She never stopped. Neither did I. Ethan broke down then. Not the controlled tears of a man maintaining composure, but the deep wrenching sobs of someone finally releasing years of accumulated pain. I put my arm around my son for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I held him while he cried. Later, after the tears had subsided, Ethan sat alone in that dark shop holding his mother's letter. And for the first time since Ruth died, he spoke to her. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. The doorbell rang at 7 the next morning. I had been awake for hours sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching the sunrise paint Ruth's lilies in shades of gold. I knew who was at the door before I opened it. Some arrivals announced themselves not with sound, but with a shift in the air itself. Ethan stood on the porch like a stranger, waiting to be invited into a house he had known his entire life. There were no lawyers flanking him, no folders of documents clutched in his hands, no prepared speeches or rehearsed excuses. He wore the same clothes from the night before, wrinkled and untucked as if he had not slept at all. His eyes were swollen from crying. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a man who had finally set down a weight he had been carrying for years. I opened the door wider and stepped aside. No words were necessary. He walked in slowly, his footsteps hesitant on the hardwood floor Ruth had polished every week for 4 decades. We moved to the kitchen table without discussion, taking the same seats we had occupied for countless family breakfasts when Ruth was still alive. I could almost see her standing at the stove, flipping pancakes, humming softly to the radio. Her absence filled the room like a presence. The silence between us was heavy, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of 2 people who have exhausted all their defenses and have nothing left but truth. I waited. This conversation needed to begin with Ethan's voice, not mine. I didn't want your money, Dad. The words came out raw, stripped of pretense. I know that's what it looked like. I know that's what everyone probably thinks, but it was never about the money. He stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I wanted you to see me. My whole life I felt invisible in that shop. Every customer who walked through the door asked about you. Every employee compared my decisions to yours. Every success was credited to the foundation you built, and every failure was blamed on my inexperience. He paused, his jaw working as he struggled to find the next words. I thought if I took control, if I made it mine, I would finally matter. I thought if your name wasn't on everything, people would start noticing mine. A bitter laugh escaped him. I was so stupid. I didn't understand that taking something doesn't make it yours. It just makes you a thief. I listened without interrupting. Ruth had taught me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply to hear them, to let them speak their pain into existence without judgment or correction. Ethan needed to say these things. He needed to hear himself say them. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I wrapped my hands around my cold coffee cup and spoke carefully. I always saw you, son. I saw you every day. I watched you grow up in that shop, watched you become a man, watched you struggle to find your place. My voice caught slightly, and I had to pause before continuing. But I didn't know how to show it. I showed love through work, through building, through providing. Your mother was my translator. She took the things I felt and turned them into words you could understand. When she died, I lost that. I lost the words, and I didn't realize how much you needed them until it was too late. Ethan finally looked up. There were fresh tears in his eyes, but also something else. Recognition, understanding, the beginning of a bridge across the chasm that had separated us for years. The conversation turned to Lauren. I laid out the evidence Patricia had gathered, the forged signatures, the communications with competitors, the betrayal, not just of the business, but of Ethan himself. I kept my voice level, presenting facts without editorializing, letting the documentation speak for itself. Ethan did not defend her. He did not make excuses or offer explanations. He simply nodded, his expression hardening into something that looked like resignation. I know, he said quietly. I've known for a while, I think. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. The way she looked at the shop, at me, at everything, like we were assets to be managed, not people to be loved. He exhaled slowly. I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to face the fact that I married someone who saw me as a ladder to climb, not a partner to walk beside. I set clear boundaries then. Lauren had to be removed from the company completely. She would face no criminal prosecution because dragging our family through a public trial would only deepen the wounds, but there would be no mercy either. She would sign a settlement agreement relinquishing all claims to the business, all connections to our family, all pretense of belonging to something she had tried to destroy. She would leave with nothing except the consequences of her own choices. Ethan agreed. But as he nodded, he added something that mattered more than all the legal arrangements combined. I'm not divorcing her for you, Dad. I want you to understand that. His voice was steady now, carrying a conviction I had not heard from him in years. I'm divorcing her because I finally see what she is, and because I finally see what I became when I was with her. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to be someone who takes what isn't his, who lies to people who love him, who throws away everything that matters for something that doesn't. I looked at my son across the table where Ruth used to serve us breakfast, and I saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not the resentful shadow who had planned betrayal, not the desperate man who had signed documents erasing his father's legacy. I saw Ethan, my son, flawed and wounded and finally ready to heal. That's the only reason that matters, I said. Forgiveness was never the goal, understanding was, and understanding had finally arrived. The meeting with Lauren took place 3 days later in Patricia's office. I wanted it on neutral ground away from the shop she had tried to steal. Patricia had prepared everything meticulously, the evidence of forgery laid out in chronological order, the communications with competitors printed and highlighted, the legal analysis of criminal exposure detailed in plain language. When Lauren walked in with her own attorney, she still carried herself with the arrogance I had come to recognize. That arrogance lasted approximately 4 minutes. Patricia presented the choice with clinical precision. Option 1, Lauren would sign a settlement agreement admitting to forgery and corporate espionage, surrender all claims to company assets, and leave permanently. In exchange, we would not pursue criminal prosecution. Option 2, we would file charges with the district attorney and ensure that every detail of her conduct became part of the public record. I watched Lauren's face as she flipped through page after page of evidence, the forged signatures with expert analysis, the emails to competitors with timestamps proving their authenticity. With each page, another layer of her composure cracked. Her attorney whispered something in her ear. Lauren's jaw tightened, but Patricia had built an airtight case. There was no loophole to slip through, no sympathetic narrative to construct. Lauren signed the settlement agreement without looking at me. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote her name. When she finished, she walked out without a word. She left the same way she had arrived in our family, with nothing except ambition. Ethan filed for divorce the same week. The proceedings moved swiftly. Lauren had surrendered her claims in the settlement agreement, eliminating any basis for negotiation. When her own family learned the full scope of what she had done, they distanced themselves with remarkable speed. The woman who had climbed so aggressively found herself with no ladder left, no one willing to offer a hand. 3 months later, I heard that Lauren had taken a job at a furniture store 2 hours away, working as a sales clerk for an hourly wage that would have made her laugh in contempt just a year earlier. I didn't feel joy at this news, only a quiet recognition that consequences eventually find everyone. Patricia and I spent weeks unwinding the fraudulent restructuring. Every forged document was invalidated. Every illegitimate transfer was reversed. The shop's ownership structure reverted to its original form, with my name restored as founder and primary shareholder. But I did not return as CEO. Instead, I established a new governance structure. Ethan would remain with the company, but not in a leadership position. He would start in an operational role, working alongside the machinists and fabricators he had once dismissed. He would learn the business from the ground up, the way I had learned it. Leadership would come eventually, but only after he had earned it through demonstrated competence. No more paperwork shortcuts, no more inherited authority. Ethan accepted these terms without argument. I think he understood that the path back to respect led through humility, not ambition. Howard agreed to re-sign the contract with our shop. We shook hands in his office the way we had done for 30 years. But Howard added one condition: he wanted Ethan to deliver the first shipment under the restored partnership, personally, face to face. I understood what Howard was doing. He was giving my son an opportunity that could not be found in any legal document. He was offering a chance for genuine reconciliation. Ethan drove the delivery truck himself on a Tuesday morning. I did not go with him. This was something he needed to do alone. When he returned that afternoon, his eyes were red, but his shoulders were straighter than I had seen them in months. Howard had met him at the loading dock. Ethan had apologized, not with excuses, but with simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Howard had listened, then placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," Howard had said. "Not of what you did, but of who you're becoming." Ethan told me those words hit him harder than any punishment could have, harder than losing the company, harder than losing his wife, because they came from someone who had known Ruth, who understood exactly what she would have wanted for her son. Lauren had built her life on appearances. When the mirror broke, there was nothing left to reflect. But for Ethan, the breaking was just the beginning. 6 months passed. The shop did not return to its former glory overnight, and I did not expect it to. Recovery is slower than destruction, quieter, less dramatic, but it was happening. Old employees who had left during Lauren's reign began trickling back, drawn by word that the shop had returned to its roots. New relationships formed with clients who valued integrity over aggressive pricing. The machines hummed again with purpose, rather than mere productivity. Ethan worked the floor every day. Not in an office reviewing spreadsheets, but alongside the machinists and fabricators, learning the craft he had dismissed for so many years. His hands developed calluses. His clothes carried the smell of metal and oil. He arrived before dawn and stayed past sunset, not to impress me or prove anything to anyone watching, but because he finally understood what the shop represented. It was not a business to be managed. It was a legacy to be honored. The turning point came when a new client approached us, a manufacturing company that had heard rumors about our troubles and was hesitant to commit. Ethan handled the negotiation himself. He did not invoke my name or trade on my reputation. He presented his own vision for the partnership, his own commitment to quality, his own word as collateral. The client pushed back, asked hard questions, demanded assurances. Ethan answered every challenge with honesty and humility. The client signed. When Ethan told me about the contract, I smiled. A real smile, the kind that starts somewhere deep in your chest before it reaches your face. The kind I had not felt since Ruth was alive. "You did that yourself," I said. "No one handed it to you." Ethan nodded, and I saw something in his eyes that had been missing for years: pride. Not the desperate, grasping pride that had driven him to betrayal, but the quiet pride of genuine accomplishment. That evening, I finally opened Ruth's letter number 3. I had been carrying it for months, taking it out sometimes just to hold it, afraid to break the seal. This was the last new thing I would ever hear from my wife. Once I read it, there would be no more surprises, no more wisdom waiting to be discovered. The finality of that terrified me more than any business crisis ever could. But the time had come. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and unfolded the letter inside. "Samuel," she had written, "if you're reading this, it means you've made it through. I knew you would. You are stronger than you believe, kinder than you show, and more loved than you will ever understand. I'm so proud of you." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept reading. "Don't hold on to the shop forever. Pass it on when Ethan is ready. Don't live in the past. Find new joys, new purposes, new reasons to wake up each morning. And remember this, my love, I loved you not because you were strong, but because you knew when to be gentle. That was always your real strength. The world sees your hands that build. I saw your heart that heals. Now go live, Samuel. Live fully and freely. I'll be watching." I called Ethan to the shop that Sunday morning. The machines were silent, the light golden through dusty windows, the air thick with decades of memories. We stood in the main production area where I had taught him to measure and cut when he was just a boy, where Ruth used to bring us lunch and scold us for working through meals. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys. Not a symbolic gesture, but the actual keys to every door, every cabinet, every piece of equipment in the building. I placed them in Ethan's hands. "This is yours now," I said. "Not because I'm giving up, not because I'm tired, but because you've earned it." Ethan looked at the keys, then at me. Tears welled in his eyes. "I won't waste it, Dad. I promise." I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "I know. Your mother knew too." Some betrayals don't end in revenge. They end in something harder to earn, a second chance that wasn't given but built. Ruth knew that. She always did. And standing in the shop, she helped create, watching my son become the man she believed he could be. I finally understood why she had prepared those letters. Not to punish, not to protect, but to prove that love, when it's patient enough, can survive anything, even betrayal. And that was Samuel's story. You know what strikes me most about this journey is not the betrayal itself, but Ruth's extraordinary love. She prepared those letters knowing she might never see the outcome. She trusted that patience and truth would eventually win, even when she would not be there to witness it. That is the kind of love that transcends death. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: never sign documents when you are grieving. Grief clouds judgment, and there are people in this world who will exploit your vulnerability without hesitation. Always read what you sign. Always have your own attorney review important papers. Trust, but verify. And if you are a parent watching this, remember that your children need your words as much as your work. Samuel showed love through building and providing, but Ethan needed to hear it spoken aloud. Sometimes the things we assume are obvious are completely invisible to the people who need them most. Say what you feel while you still can. Finally, remember that redemption is possible, but it must be earned, not given. A second chance handed too easily teaches nothing. A second chance built through genuine effort and humility can transform a person completely. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Revenge Room and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.